This video is part 1 of Chapter 9, Industrial Organizational, Cognitive and Human Factor Psychology for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. In this chapter, we're going to explore some of the more experimentally oriented areas of research, but also areas of applied work that people can do when they have interest in psychology, neuroscience, and human development. We'll start with sort of an umbrella description of what industrial organizational, or more commonly called IO psychology, is all about. Most broadly, it's the study of how people act in work settings. In some cases, these are individuals, these are professionals who give a lot of their attention to applying research, knowledge, tools, practices, to improve the hiring process. So they may be creating selection programs, doing testing and assessment to ensure that employees are a good fit for the jobs that they've been assigned to, increasing their level of satisfaction and productivity as a result. So some of these individuals will be involved in creating tests and assessments that they then validate and use when they are interviewing job applicants in order to determine if they should be hired, and if they are hired, where specifically they should be placed. They may also be involved in performance evaluations, describing the criteria by which employees will be evaluated, and they will participate in training supervisors to do that kind of performance assessment and documentation. As a result, these are, highly specialized individuals who often work in an HR context, but not always. At the organizational level, IO psychologists are often involved in training and development activities within their organization. They may conduct research projects, essentially, that are called needs analyses, where they determine what kind of skills and needs, what kind of skills and technical abilities are required in certain kinds of positions, and then making sure that people have the training to achieve those outcomes. They may study things like employee turnover and absenteeism, job satisfaction, and so on, all with the goal in mind of improving those metrics so that the organization as a whole can be more successful. They may study how services that are provided for employees can improve retention, improve absenteeism, improve morale, job satisfaction, and ultimately productivity. It's like, what would be the benefit? Would the benefits offset the costs of adding, say, meal programs, childcare, gym facilities, and so on? They provide information to management and executives on how to create incentive programs. And sometimes they're involved in kind of retooling jobs so that they are more meaningful, more challenging, more satisfying to employees. They may be interested in doing research on leadership and how different styles of leadership are beneficial in different kinds of organizational contexts. And they may be involved in individual and group training programs that are designed to enhance leadership and communication, specifically in supervisory positions. Some of the purposes of IO psychology, more broadly expressed, the overall goal is to help companies to understand how their organizations are functioning and to articulate when changes need to be made. So if you have an organization, for instance, that's struggling with productivity, maybe struggling with absenteeism and turnover, that's definitely a threat to the organization's success. So an IO psychologist may be brought in to do some assessment to determine what kinds of ways in which the organization is functioning are causing these negative outcomes. So as a result, they're going to identify problems, look at potential solutions, and then make recommendations to the organization as a whole. They can also be called in to organizations to resolve conflicts, to also build conflict resolution skills in employees and in particular in management. They may do an examination of the power structures that exist within an organization. Many organizations struggle with internal communication, and often when employees are dissatisfied, when they're unhappy, it may be because they perceive that they are not being told what they need to be told, or that they're in fact not being told the truth. So an IO psychologist can come in and really look at those lines of communication and make suggestions as to how to improve them. Looking at this list, IO psychology is really applicable to any kind of work setting. Now, shifting gears to a more purely experimental, a little bit less applied in some cases, area of psychology, that's cognitive psychology. But what you'll discover, on the surface, this seems like a straight up experimental area of interest within psychology. But what you find is cognition or thinking is so elemental to everything that we do. There are also a wide range of applied kinds of jobs that involve cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychologists study human thinking. So they study how people bring in information, make sense of that information, store that information, how do they get the information back out, and also how they solve problems and make decisions. Cognitive psychologists are often involved in research, and the goals are, based on that definition of how do people take in, manipulate, store, retrieve information. They're going to be focused on constructing theories and articulating hypotheses that are connected to those aspects of cognition. The interest areas that are housed underneath cognition are things like attention, visual and auditory processing, memory, reasoning, retrieval, forgetting, problem solving. My very first research assistant job as a college student was working in a memory lab at Ohio Wesleyan University with Dr. Harry Barrick. And while I personally wasn't interested in cognition as my particular area of interest, I learned an awful lot about how to articulate hypotheses, how to design studies, how to conduct research, how to do data analysis, and so on. So I have a lot of respect for what cognitive psychologists do. Some applied activities that involve cognitive psychology include studying anything related to learning. So cognition and cognitive psychology more broadly, they may work in applied areas designing teaching and learning methods. They may work to improve memory skills or to rehabilitate people. In the last chapter, we talked about applications of neuroscience in the rehabilitation space. Cognitive psychology may actually be the foundational theory on which those rehabilitation efforts are based. They may consult with people in companies that design products in order to make those products useful. So cognitive psychologists may actually be called upon as experts to help in the design of learning softwares, software that's designed to make decision-making easier for people, designed to help people remember to do things, and so on. But you'll also find cognitive psychologists involved in the gaming space, where they're providing expert information, expert ideas on how to build games that are challenging and in some ways difficult, but still doable so that they're entertaining. There are specialists who are cognitive psychologists who work specifically in the human-computer interaction space, where they're specifically hired to test apps and software and other kinds of computer applications to improve them in terms of their usability and effectiveness. Similarly, human factor psychology, which some days I think if I had it all to do over again, I would go into this area because I find it fascinating. Human factor psychologists are sometimes called engineering psychologists, and they really look at the interaction between people and things in their environment. There's especially an interest in machines, like how do people interact with a car, for example. Human factor psychologist, if you imagine sitting in your car and looking at the dashboard and all of the information that we now have in front of us when we're driving, like you have navigation screens, entertainment systems, information about your speed, and even your gas gauge, the human factor psychologist is going to be brought in to make sure that each of these displays is usable, but not so absorbing that it interferes with the capacity to drive. Or if you're employed by, say, the Air Force, you may be engaged to evaluate how the cockpit of a fighter jet is constructed so that even under stressful circumstances that pilots can effectively manage the job that they have to do without becoming confused, without becoming overwhelmed with the information. They also may be involved in optimizing work environments. So I can remember back in the 70s, there was this big push in education to have open plan learning spaces. So like they wanted to do away with classrooms, separate rooms, and have students move from pod to pod in big, huge open spaces. I'm pretty sure that was a decision that was not based on recommendations by a human factor psychologist who understands children, because it was utter chaos and it was very loud. So, just by way of example, human factor psychologists who have a solid understanding of how people understand the world around them can be of great help in designing environments that make people more productive and happier, and reduces the possibility of fatigue and error. They may be involved in product development, and that means, let's say a company is wanting to design a particular toy for 3 to 5 year olds, and the human factor psychologist may work with a developmental expert in watching how people are using products and what kind of mistakes they tend to make. So let's say it's a game for that particular population, and knowing what their limitations are, what their interests are, how do you design that toy, because it's essentially a machine, how to be engaging but not frustrating. If you've ever interacted with a 3 to 5 year old, there's no worse toy than a toy that they can't figure out. So how do you maximize making it engaging but also enjoyable to interact with? Another example of product design, think about the cell phone that you use all the time. Human factor psychologists were involved, I guarantee you, in testing the usability of that phone in your hand. What kind of tweaks, what kind of changes, like how long should a text message linger for you to be able to see it when it comes up on a notification? Those are kind of human factors variables, but also just the physical aspects of the device itself. So, for example, in the early days of cell phones, you had a physical keypad where you had to touch each key, And now we've made this transition to glass um, touchpads that we all tend to use. There were human factors psychologists involved in making that transition and making it doable for people. So what are some of the bachelor's degree level opportunities for people with interests in these areas? Human resources jobs, and that can include people who are generalists in human resources, people engaged in employee relations and recruiting, HR departments, sometimes personnel departments, manage employees. So their job is to recruit, place, deal with salary and benefits, deal with training, and also doing assessment. What do employees need? How happy are they? And how do we mitigate it if they're not happy? Generalists are going to be dealing with every level of what was just described. So they're going to manage personnel, they're going to do recruitment, placement, training, and development. Employee relations specialists, on the other hand, are specialists in communicating and relating with employees. So say you have a very big organization and HR has lots of staff that make it up. You would need a way to ease communication between management and executive level people and rank and file employees. So one of the things that employee relations specialists are going to do is to fashion messages, communicate with staff, and also build relationships in the process of dealing with policies and procedures, training, enforcement of policies, and so on. Recruiters are specifically employed to find new potential employees, get resumes and applications, vet them, pull together files, arrange for people to be put into the pipeline for interviews, and so on. Also in human resources, you have people who are specifically working in the benefits administration space, as well as those who are involved in training and development. Benefits administrators have a very important job, and by benefits we mean largely healthcare benefits, but also insurance in other forms like life insurance, disability insurance, and so on. Their job is a difficult one, especially in recent years, trying to find the right fit between health insurance companies and your specific organization based on its size and the demographics of your employee base. These administrators are going to administer benefit plans. Like every year in the fall, HR at my workplace puts out a presentation. Here are the benefit packages. You need to tell us by a specific date which package you want, or if you're indeed opting to be insured. Compensation analysts are going to help the organization decide how much to pay people and what other compensation elements they're going to be getting. So they're going to design and analyze compensation packages that are attractive enough to maintain, to keep people interested in working at your organization. But also, they're reasonable, they're competitive with other kinds of organizations. So they're going to look at salary, bonuses, other kinds of incentives for employees. Finally, you have training and development specialists who can, in large organizations, you're going to have permanent employees who do this kind of work. They, around the year offer trainings, they offer development opportunities for keeping the organization's staff up to date in terms of their skills and abilities, making sure they're compliant with federal programs and state programs. In some organizations, that's going to be important. Another kind of bachelor's level, at the entry level anyway, is an industrial design assistant. Industrial designers build they develop concepts for products that people use all the time. So an industrial designer can be working in any kind of industry, everything from toys to computers to furniture. Like, for instance, here's a stupid complaint, story time, very briefly. My couches, I have beautiful couches. They're the first, like, really super grown up furniture that I bought with my husband. Um, some industrial designer must think that all human beings are at least 5'8" because my feet don't reach the floor. That's just not very thoughtful of them, is it? Some industrial designer has to decide how long people's legs are supposed to be in order to sit comfortably in a couch. So any product that is going to be put out into the market usually has an industrial designer's fingerprints all over it. If not, you run the risk of, say, having a couch that annoys people. Bachelor's degree holders can come into this area to work as assistants, doing what the professional industrial designers, who typically have advanced degrees, ask them to do. So they may be setting up testing of prototypes and things like that. So they may coordinate the design work, testing out ideas. They may also work to pull together members of the team, like the engineers, the marketing, the production and sales people. So the design assistant is really going to be analogous to a professional assistant, who, we used to call people like this secretaries, which was really not descriptive of what they do at all. If you're assisting someone who has very specialized training, you're going to be the person who holds the whole team together, who makes sure everybody has the information that they need in order to get the job done, especially when you have multifaceted teams that are interdisciplinary. It's helpful to have assistants who can really weave together those different professionals. People with a psych major who also have solid computer graphics skills and software skills are particularly in demand. So that can be an interesting way in if you have interests in both psychology and computer science. Since I mentioned administrative assistants and administrative services previously, administrative assistant work is much more highly professionalized today than it was, say, in the 1950s and 60s, where you had a secretarial pool who largely did typing. Now, administrative assistants have wide-ranging duties, some with more responsibilities than you might expect. So if you have executives in an organization, so for example, the dean of your university has an administrative assistant, or they may be called an executive assistant. And basically their job is to make that office run efficiently and smoothly. Administrative assistants are going to work with new staff. They may also be tasked by their boss to research ideas and pull together reports. They may are likely to be involved in scheduling meetings, managing the calendar, keeping access to files, and knowing where everything is. So, any successful executive is going to have at least one executive assistant or administrative assistant who keeps them, who keeps the access to the important information that they need available and ready for meetings and decision-making processes. Executive assistants also can be engaged in working with teams. So like if you have in the structure of an organization, you have a president and an executive assistant to the president, that executive assistant may liaise with a bunch of other people who are in similar positions lower down in the organization, providing those individuals with support. Office management is somewhat different. Office managers make sure that basically whatever office it is going to run smoothly, efficiently, and without errors. So some of the aspects of the job of office management involves some administrative assistance type jobs and reception services, but also can involve a lot of dealing with data, generating reports, pulling meetings together, doing payroll, and a variety of other things. People who excel in these kinds of entry-level positions are people with really solid organizational, communication, research, and stress management skills. When I say that, administrative assistants and executive assistants are really the backbone of organizations, I mean it. Without those people really running the organization from the background, the organization would not function. Project management is another area that it's increasingly becoming professionalized, meaning that more and more you're going to start seeing higher education requirements for people in these positions, and it may even require some certification. So that's something, if this is attractive to you, to keep your eye on. I have noticed a trend in this area of it becoming more professionalized depending on the industry. What project managers do is they're going to be in the position of providing oversight and guidance to people who are conducting projects. So you have, a particular part of what a company does. A project manager is going to be assigned to ride herd over that project and make sure that it's run effectively. And then to report back to the executives, the leadership of the organization to determine whether or not the project was successful. They're going to provide guidance, training, coaching, but also coordination of the team's work. Managers are going to also be involved in writing reports and documentation, as well as doing some of those usual things that managers do, providing performance evaluations and, working in concert with HR to determining who you need to hire in certain kinds of roles. Having a high degree of competency in organization, in problem solving, and communication is really essential for this kind of work. Going way off in a different direction, there's a whole career area. And like project management, this is increasingly becoming more professionalized. I'm seeing more and more master's level programs or certificate programs in this area. So again, keep an eye on the marketplace and see if this is starting to change. User experience strategists, sometimes they're called UX strategists or digital UX strategists, are people who are kind of at that intersection between psychology and computer science, where they're looking at products or websites to ensure that the user who is interacting with those products or websites, that they're getting the experience that the designer of those products or websites wants. UX strategists mostly are working in that digital space. So you're talking about digital products like websites, business websites, apps, all that kind of stuff. I guarantee that the Facebooks and Googles of the world have tons of user experience strategists who work for them. The work of being a UX user experience strategist is to work with tech teams to give input on how to design a website so that it's functional. There are a few things more frustrating than trying to find information on a website but never being able to find it. I'm quite sure that you've run into websites like this where you're trying to find what you need, but you simply can't get to it. That kind of frustration in users can lead them to simply leave the website. That's counter to business goals. So the UX strategist, their job is really to help the organization design websites, design apps that are functional, that are engaging for users in support of business goals. So if you are creating a retail website, you need to make sure that that website is navigable, attractive to the eye, and easy to use. If, say, the payment process is clunky and difficult and prone to bugs, people are not going to buy your products. So the UX strategist is going to be involved there. To prepare for this kind of career, there's a preference in this workspace for people who have specific experience rather than a certain major. There is some preference, though, and you should keep this in mind. Having an interest in experimental psychology is great because UX strategists often are engaged in research projects. But it would also be beneficial to have some of that web design, graphic design, computer science experience in your back pocket or even in your front one to help with that work. And that concludes part 1 of chapter 9.